Most people grow up thinking sexual desire is something you're supposed to keep hidden. It's treated like a private weakness, a guilty urge, a thing that's too much to talk about openly and too messy to understand deeply. So people learn two options. Either you indulge it in silence or you fight it with shame. And that's exactly why so many people feel torn inside. Because sexual desire isn't just about pleasure. It isn't a small craving that only lives in your body. It's not some childish impulse you're meant to grow out of once you become mature. Sexual desire is bigger than that. It's a kind of energy, a current, something that moves through your whole inner world, your mood, your imagination, your confidence, your ambition, your hunger for life. It's not something that begins with thought, it begins beneath thought, and you can actually notice this if you pay attention. Desire rises before you even form a sentence in your mind. It shows up before your logic can explain it. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock politely at the door and wait for approval. It just arrived, which should tell you something important. This force does not belong to the rational part of you. It belongs to a deeper layer, a layer that speaks in feelings, images, instincts, dreams, the part of you that doesn't think in words first, but in impulses and symbols. And that's why sexual energy has always been misunderstood, because modern culture only knows how to talk about it in two extremes. On one side, it gets reduced into entertainment, a product, a dopamine hit, something you consume quickly, like junk food for the mind. On the other side, it gets treated like a sin, a dangerous appetite that must be suppressed, controlled, punished. But both of those views are incomplete because they're both missing what this energy really is. Sexual desire is not good or bad on its own. It's neutral. It's raw life force. It's the same kind of energy that pushes a seed to break open the earth and reach for the sun. It's the force that makes life expand. It's the inner yes that wants to express itself through you. And before it ever becomes sexual in the obvious sense, it starts as something more basic, a pull, a tension, a longing, that feeling of wanting more. I want to become more. I want to feel alive. You know that restless feeling some people carry, that hunger that makes them chase stimulation, chase attention, chase constant novelty, chase chaos. Most of them think they're just bored, or they think they need a new relationship, or a bigger goal, or a new city, or a new identity. But often, what they're experiencing is sexual energy with nowhere to go. It's a life force that isn't being understood, shaped, or directed. And this is where the real problem begins. Because energy doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. If you don't guide it consciously, it doesn't stay calm and harmless. It leaks. It spills into whatever pathways are easiest. And what are the easiest pathways in the modern world? Scrolling, porn, fantasy, flirting without meaning, attention-seeking, compulsive pleasure, cheap stimulation. Not because people are evil, not because they are weak, but because the world offers them instant release everywhere they turn. So instead of learning to work with desire, people simply discharge it over and over. And the strange thing is, it never feels like enough. That's what nobody tells you. Even when you satisfy the urge, something still feels missing. You get the pleasure, but you don't get the fulfillment. You get the release, but you don't get the direction. And this is why so many people feel tired, even though they're constantly chasing stimulation. Their energy is being spent, but nothing is being built. Nothing is growing. Nothing is being transformed into something meaningful. It's like burning fuel every day, but never moving forward. And the deeper tragedy is this: when you treat desire as something shameful, you don't become pure, you become divided. Part of you wants to rise, and part of you wants to hide. Part of you wants to create, and part of you wants to escape. And the longer that division continues, the more confused you become about who you even are. Because you don't just lose your discipline, you lose your inner unity. And that's the foundation of a weak life. Not lack of talent, not lack of opportunity, but lack of inner integration. And the reason this matters is because sexual energy, when it's understood properly, becomes one of the most powerful fuels a person can ever access, not for pleasure, but for purpose.
So what happens next is predictable. When people feel that inner hunger, they start searching for stimulation like it's a survival need. They tell themselves, if I just find the right thing, the right person, the right experience, I'll finally feel complete again. But the missing piece usually isn't pleasure, it's purpose. Because pleasure can give you a moment of relief, but it can't give you direction. It can help you forget yourself for 10 minutes, but it can't help you become yourself. And this is where sexual energy turns dangerous. Not because it's bad, but because it refuses to stay trapped. When sexual energy has no higher outlet, it revolts. It starts acting out through obsession, through craving, through distraction, through impulsive decisions you later can't even explain. That's why trying to moralize desire has never worked. People have been shaming it for centuries, labeling it sinful, trying to crush it into silence, and yet it keeps returning because you can't shame a fundamental force of life into obedience. The psyche doesn't respond to condemnation, it responds to understanding. The moment you realize sexual desire is not just physical appetite, but creative energy, everything starts to shift. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? You start asking a different question. What is this trying to build through me? And as soon as you ask that, responsibility enters the picture. Not repression, not indulgence, responsibility, because to carry strong desire is to carry strong power, and power demands consciousness. Without consciousness, your impulses become your master. You don't even feel like you're choosing anymore. You feel like you're being pulled, like something inside you keeps hijacking your attention, your discipline, your priorities. It feels like you're living from the inside of a storm. But with consciousness, something completely different happens. The same impulses that once controlled you become fuel. That's the difference between being driven and being directed. Driven means you're moving, but you don't know where you're going. Directed means the energy is still strong, but now it has a purpose. Now it's working for you instead of against you. And this is why you need to look carefully at your own life, not in a self-hating way, in an honest way. Where do you feel restless? Where do you feel the urge for intensity? Where do you feel cravings for connection, attention, expression, stimulation? Most people label these feelings as flaws, like, I'm just impatient, I'm just weak, I'm just addicted, I'm just too much. But these aren't flaws, they're signals. Desire shows up first because desire is movement. It refuses stagnation. It refuses numbness. It pushes you toward growth, whether you like it or not. It pressures you to become more than you are right now. And if you ignore it, it will turn destructive. But if you listen to it, it becomes visionary. This is the truth nobody wants to hear. The world is filled with people who learned how to consume, but never learned how to create. They discharge their energy constantly, and then they wonder why their life never changes. They watch, they scroll, they fantasize, they chase, they release, they repeat. Then they wake up the next day feeling the same emptiness, the same restlessness, the same hunger. Because creation requires something most people don't train: containment. Creation requires the ability to hold tension without instantly escaping it. That tension of desire is uncomfortable. Yes, it creates pressure in the body, restlessness in the mind. But that pressure is exactly where transformation happens, because inside that tension, the personality starts to reorganize itself. You stop living for quick relief and start building a higher aim. So the real question isn't whether you have sexual desire. Everyone does. The real question is, are you unconscious of it or in dialogue with it? Does it drain you or build you? Does it keep you chasing sensations or does it lead you toward meaning? Because this force will shape your life either way. The only choice is whether it shapes you blindly or consciously. And once you begin to examine your attractions honestly, without judging yourself, without justifying yourself, you start discovering parts of yourself that have been invisible for years. Because desire doesn't choose its objects at random. It's selective, symbolic, deeply personal. Every attraction is a message from your unconscious, written in the language of emotion and imagery, not logic. And here's the twist. Most people think they desire someone for who that person is, but more often, they desire what that person represents: strength, freedom, tenderness, danger, authority, innocence, creativity. Those qualities awaken something dormant inside you. Desire is rarely about possession, it's about recognition.
When you feel that sudden intensity towards someone, it can seem like it came out of nowhere, like the other person has some kind of magnetic force. But what's really happening is deeper than that. You're seeing something in them that resonates with something inside you, something unexpressed, something dormant, something you haven't fully lived out yet. And your psyche responds the only way it knows how, with heat, with longing, with obsession. That's why attraction isn't random. And it's also why certain patterns repeat again and again. The same type of person, the same emotional rhythm, the same highs, the same crash, the same confusion afterward. At first, people call it fate. They say things like, why do I always end up with this kind of person? But these repetitions aren't accidents. They're unfinished psychological conversations. The unconscious returns to the same symbol until you finally understand what it's trying to show you. Until then, you're not really choosing. You're being compelled. And most people mistake compulsion for choice. They call it chemistry, they call it love, they call it passion. But often it's something far more primitive, a pull toward what feels familiar, even if it's destructive. And that's why people are so often attracted to what they consciously claim they don't want. They'll say they want peace, yet crave chaos. They'll say they value kindness, yet feel drawn to cruelty. They'll talk about stability, yet chase intensity that keeps burning their life down. They'll say they want closeness, yet pursue people who remain distant, unavailable, cold. And these contradictions aren't because the person is stupid, they're because the inner
world is divided. Desire exposes where your personality is split. It shows you the traits you've disowned, the parts of yourself you were taught to hide, reject, or feel unsafe expressing. And when you can't live something within yourself, you go looking for it in someone else. That's the psychology of projection. Not in a textbook way, in a painfully real way. What you cannot admit you want, you chase. What you cannot accept in yourself, you seek outside. What you cannot embody, you worship. And attraction doesn't only reveal what's missing, it also reveals what's wounded, because early experiences leave marks, not just memories, but emotional imprints. Imprints that shape how the psyche understands love, safety, power, attention, worth. If you grew up in an environment where love felt unpredictable, your nervous system may confuse anxiety with passion. If you grew up feeling ignored, you might chase people who make you prove yourself. If you grew up around emotional intensity, you might feel bored when something is calm and healthy. This is why some people keep repeating painful relationship dynamics, even when they swear they're done with them. They aren't trying to suffer, they're trying to resolve something, because the psyche is not primarily interested in comfort, it's interested in completion. It will recreate the same emotional landscape, even when it hurts, because deep down it believes, maybe this time it will end differently. Maybe this time I'll finally win love. Maybe this time I'll finally feel chosen. Maybe this time I'll finally feel safe. And that's why willpower alone often fails. You can swear you'll choose better. You can write your standards down. You can make promises to yourself. Yet somehow, you still get pulled back into the same kind of story, because the attraction isn't coming from conscious preference. It's coming from unconscious identification. It's not you choosing. It's a deeper pattern choosing through you. And until that pattern is brought into awareness, desire operates like fate. It feels like destiny, like you have no control. But the moment you start looking closely, the spell begins to break. Instead of asking, who am I attracted to? You start asking a better question. What quality am I responding to? It's a subtle shift, but it changes everything, because now desire becomes a teacher instead of a tyrant. You stop being dragged around by it and start learning from it. You begin to understand what you admire, envy, or fear in others is often what your own psyche is demanding you integrate. If you're drawn to confidence, maybe you've silenced your own authority. If you crave intensity, maybe you've numbed your own vitality. If you desire gentleness, maybe you've been too harsh with yourself.
If you're obsessed with someone's freedom, maybe you've been living in a cage you never questioned. Desire points toward what wants expression within you. It shows you the parts of yourself that have been neglected, suppressed, undeveloped. And once you see that, your relationship with attraction changes. You become more humble, because you can't blame the outside world so easily anymore. But you also can't romanticize everything as destiny, because now you understand attraction isn't always a sign that something is right. Sometimes it's simply a sign that something inside you is unfinished. When you start seeing your attractions clearly, people stop being fantasies. They become mirrors, and mirrors are uncomfortable. Sometimes they reflect something flattering, something you secretly wish you could embody. Other times they reflect something disturbing, something you've been avoiding your whole life. Either way, a mirror demands courage, because to see yourself honestly means you have to give up the comfort of illusion, and most people don't want that. It's easier to stay enchanted, to stay in the spell, because enchantment allows projection. It lets you paint the other person with whatever story you need. It lets you believe they're the one, or the missing piece, or the answer. But consciousness? Consciousness demands responsibility. The moment the projection collapses, the other person becomes just human. Not a savior, not a villain, not a symbol carrying the weight of your entire inner world. And once that happens, something shifts inside desire itself. It loses its compulsive edge, and it gains depth, because the relationship changes when the individual changes. This doesn't mean desire disappears. It doesn't mean you become numb or detached or above it all. Actually, it becomes richer, more grounded, more human. It's no longer fueled by lack, but by connection. No longer driven by unconscious need, but by conscious choice. You move from being possessed by desire to being in relationship with it. And that's a completely different way to live. In that state, attraction becomes a path to self-knowledge. Every longing becomes a clue. Every fascination becomes an invitation, not to chase blindly, but to reclaim something essential. What once kept you trapped in repetition now begins guiding you toward wholeness, and you can feel the difference. There's a quiet difference between a mind that is ruled by desire and a mind that has learned to contain it. One feels scattered, pulled in 10 different directions, always reacting, always chasing the next hit of intensity. The other feels centered, deliberate, capable of sustained effort. And notice something important here. This isn't about morality, it's about structure. Sexual energy is powerful because it moves the psyche so easily. It can hijack attention in seconds,
It can distort judgment. It can make you forget your values and your future. So when it's left without direction, it fragments attention. But when it's given a channel, it sharpens the will. Uncontrolled desire doesn't just distract you, it weakens your inner coherence. It turns you into someone who constantly leaks energy. And the worst part is, you don't even notice it happening, because it feels normal. You become accustomed to immediate discharge, to quick relief instead of meaningful tension. And over time, that erodes something deeper: patience. The mind learns to escape discomfort rather than stay with it. Focus shortens, impulses multiply, your attention becomes fragile, your inner world becomes noisy. You start craving constant stimulation just to feel okay. And what appears as pleasure is often a form of fatigue, a repeated draining of energy without renewal. That's why compulsive stimulation rarely satisfies. Each release promises relief, but leaves behind a subtle emptiness, a quiet sense that something important has been spent without return. The psyche senses it, even if your conscious mind doesn't want to admit it, because on some level you traded something valuable for something temporary. And the more you repeat that trade, the softer your will becomes. You start losing resistance. You start losing authority over your own attention. Decisions stop feeling chosen. They start feeling reactive. One impulse follows another, and suddenly months pass, and you don't even recognize yourself. You wonder where your discipline went, where your confidence went, where that sharp, centered version of you disappeared to. But here's the turning point. Something remarkable happens when desire is not immediately acted upon. When it's allowed to exist without discharge, the psyche enters a state of heightened tension. And yes, that tension is uncomfortable, but it's also fertile, because it gathers energy, it concentrates you, it forces you to remain present with yourself instead of escaping. Instead of running outward into action, the mind turns inward and begins to organize. This is the moment where discipline is often misunderstood, because most people think discipline means suppression. They think it means force, white-knuckling your way through temptation. But real discipline isn't suppression. It's not self-hatred. It's not violence against your nature. Discipline is containment with awareness. It's the ability to hold power without being ruled by it.
Suppression and discipline look similar on the surface, but psychologically, they're opposites. Suppression is fear-based. It's the attempt to push desire down, pretend it isn't there, deny it, distract from it, label it wrong, label it shameful. And what happens when you do that? The energy doesn't vanish. It drops into the unconscious. And in the unconscious, it doesn't become calmer. It becomes distorted. It returns in strange forms: compulsions, fantasies, irritability, emotional hunger, secret addictions, sudden self-sabotage. That's the cost of suppression. Discipline is different. Discipline is conscious containment. It's the ability to hold energy without panic, to stay present with desire without instantly acting on it, to remain in dialogue with it rather than being overwhelmed by it. And in that state, desire becomes concentrated instead of scattered. That concentration changes everything. Your attention gets deeper. Your thinking becomes more ordered. You stop feeling like your mind is constantly split in half, one part trying to focus and another part craving relief. You begin to experience something most people rarely feel: inner solidity. Not rigidity, not coldness, but coherence. The feeling that you are one person inside yourself, that your inner forces are no longer fighting each other all day. And once the psyche feels that kind of coherence, something happens quietly. It starts to trust itself, because every time you contain desire consciously, you're reinforcing an internal message: I can handle this. I don't need to run from myself. I don't need to obey every urge. I have command. Your will strengthens, not because you're forcing yourself like a machine, but because you're no longer constantly being undermined by impulse. And this self-command doesn't come from aggression. It doesn't come from hating your weakness. It comes from understanding. Specifically, understanding the cost of unconscious release. When someone truly realizes how much energy they lose through compulsive behavior, restraint stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling meaningful, because now you're not saying no to pleasure out of guilt. You're saying no because you value your clarity, you value your future, you value your inner authority. So desire is no longer the enemy. It becomes a power, a raw force that you can wield. And here's what's interesting. When desire is directed, it naturally wants higher expression. It starts seeking things that require intensity, work that demands focus, goals that demand persistence, growth that demands commitment.
The same energy that once chased sensations now becomes fuel for concentration. And this is where people start to change in ways they didn't expect. They discover an unexpected endurance. Tasks that once felt draining start to feel absorbing. Effort feels less like friction and more like flow, not because life becomes easier, but because the energy that was once leaking everywhere is now gathered. It's focused, it's available, and over time, this reshapes the personality itself. The person becomes less reactive, less easily provoked, less emotionally chaotic, not numb, not disconnected, resilient. The psyche learns it can withstand tension without collapsing, and this lesson doesn't stay confined to sexuality. It spreads into everything. Challenges are met with steadiness instead of urgency. Problems are met with patience instead of panic. Hard emotions are met with presence instead of avoidance. And this is where real strength is born. Not the loud strength that needs domination, not the performative strength that needs validation, but the quiet strength of self-possession. The kind of strength where you don't need to prove anything. You don't need constant stimulation. You don't need constant attention, because there is an inner reservoir you can draw from. Decisions become clearer. Your mind stops getting hijacked by unexamined urges. You don't live in that constant loop of, I said I wouldn't, but I did. I promised I'd stop, but I couldn't. I want better, but I keep choosing the same thing. Instead, you start living with alignment, and alignment is rare. It's what most people are starving for without realizing it. This doesn't mean desire disappears. Actually, it becomes more vivid, more integrated, more alive, because it's no longer wasted. Desire, will, and identity begin to cooperate instead of fighting each other. You experience a sense of internal agreement, like you're finally working with yourself, rather than against yourself. And when desire is directed, the psyche starts to feel purposeful. There's less inner conflict, less self-betrayal, less shame, because now you're not just reacting to life, you're shaping it.
This is what long-term vision really looks like. It's not the absence of desire. It's not becoming cold, detached, or above it all. It's the ability to delay gratification, not out of fear, but out of respect for something greater you're building. That's maturity. Not killing desire, but mastering it. Most people were trained to see sexual desire as a short-lived bodily impulse, a quick itch, something you either chase or hide. But very few realize what's actually inside that intensity, because within desire is a map to your own potential. The same force you've been tempted to fear, deny, suppress, or escape is the same force that can ignite courage, creativity, confidence, and purpose. Every surge of longing carries information. It's not just random heat, it's a message, a hint of what the self is capable of becoming. And yet, most people run from desire because it feels dangerous. It feels untamed, unpredictable, overwhelming. They mistake intensity for immorality. They confuse power with shame. So they spend years distracting themselves, trying to numb the fire instead of understanding it. But energy isn't the enemy. Its danger lies only in ignorance, in refusing to see it clearly, in failing to recognize it as a messenger, not a tyrant, because within that heat is the spark of transformation. And here's the deeper truth. The same force that pulls you toward another person can also pull you back toward yourself, toward your path, toward your destiny. If you pay attention, you'll notice something about the most magnetic people, the most influential, the most creative, the ones who seem like they have an inner gravity. They're usually not the ones who reject this energy. They're the ones who allowed it to refine them. They learned to move with it instead of constantly fighting it. They learned how to hold intensity without being consumed by it. So the energy that could have destroyed them became fuel, fuel for work, fuel for expression, fuel for building something real. What they once desired in fleeting moments became a mirror of what they could embody as a person. Because sexual desire, in its purest form, is raw, unshaped potential. It's life in its most concentrated form, asking for direction. And that redirection does not mean repression. Repression doesn't transform energy. It only bends it into shadows, anxiety, obsessions, compulsions, distractions. A person might appear disciplined on the outside, but internally, they're still being driven unconsciously. They're not in control. They're just holding pressure until it explodes somewhere else. True transformation is different. Desire must be recognized, owned, elevated,
not denied, not worshipped, integrated. And when that happens, something changes in the way you move through the world. The same fire that once chased temporary satisfaction starts creating. It starts building. It starts shaping your character. You speak with more conviction. You lead with more presence. You produce with more intensity. You stop being someone who only consumes life, and you become someone who generates it. Think of desire like a river. If it's left untamed, it floods and destroys. If you dam it completely, it stagnates and loses vitality. But when you guide it, it powers entire cities. It irrigates barren land. It brings life to places that would otherwise remain empty. Sexual energy works the same way. It's the river of vitality within you. Its current can overwhelm you or strengthen you, depending on whether you guide it with awareness. Most people avoid looking at this because it forces a confrontation with the self. Desire asks questions that are hard to answer. Who am I really?
What have I denied? What part of me has been hidden? What part of me have I been afraid to become? Desire refuses to be ignored, because the psyche will not rest until this energy finds an honest outlet, a purposeful outlet, an outlet aligned with the deeper self. And that's why, when you run from desire, you're often running from yourself, but when you embrace it consciously, you start finding yourself. True personal power is inseparable from desire. Courage is inside it. Ambition is inside it. Charisma is inside it. Even spiritual fire is inside it. It is a raw life force, the most concentrated expression of vitality. And when cultivated consciously, it transforms your character. Your perception sharpens. Your confidence grows. Your actions become deliberate. You stop living in compromise. You stop leaking energy into distractions. You stop chasing outside what has been calling you from within, because your longing was never the enemy. It was the compass. It wasn't asking you to escape. It was asking you to align, to turn inward, to recognize what you're capable of, and to act on it. Most people live their entire life with untapped power. They may succeed in conventional terms, but they feel a quiet emptiness underneath it all, a sense of energy unspent, a sense of potential untouched. But those who understand desire, those who honor it as a force of life rather than a threat, don't experience that emptiness. They live fully, passionately, deliberately. And when you finally accept that the energy you feared holds the blueprint of who you were meant to become, you stop running and you begin rising.